Hello, everybody. Just wanted to pop up in the screen here and say hello before we get started with our webinar. I know we'll have a few people joining in a little bit later today. Just wanted to say thank you, and I hope everybody's doing well. Today's program is how to develop and manage a training program. And this is an important subject. I'll barely cover everything, to be honest, here in the time that we have, but very important for us subject for us to talk about. I believe good training is the basis of all results that we see out in the field. And so we'll go through some very key components, if nothing less from today. This will give you a good thought process and hopefully motivate you for some action items. So I'm going to go ahead and shut off my video. I just wanted to say hello and thank you, and we'll go ahead and get started. You will also hopefully notice in the chat box that there's a website link for you to be able to go to our website. We have several resources that we've made available for you. I'll actually share that screen right now really quickly so that everybody can see what we have provided. So in the chat, I gave you this link to how to develop and manage a training program. This is for today's course. There are several presentation handouts, starting with learning objectives. This is an article from actually Jeff Dalto, who's one of my favorite authors for safety and health training. He's a wonderful professional safety journal, has posted many of his articles. They're easy to read and very, very fundamentally sound. There's another article from him on, so the first one was on learning objectives. The next one is blending, the ways to choose a right training delivery method. There's a lot to this. Developing learner-centric safety training article, effective safety training, evaluating safety training, a little bit about continuous improvement training, which is something as a learning organization I think is critical. And then on our website, you'll see this safety pivot. We do this at all of our classes. And we hope that the point and objective behind today is to motivate and bring forth a call to action. What can we do different? What can we do better, right? Know better, do better. So encourage you to print this out at least, or take some notes. Fill this out at the end of class for yourself, take a picture of it, email it to yourself. I usually save it to a PDF and go 30 days ahead from today on my calendar and attach it to an appointment on my calendar, where I then kind of self-check how have I done with my commitment or my goals or the things that I've learned from this class and that I wanted to put into action. So good information for you there, hopefully, to follow up with after. So we don't publish this website page with these resources. So again, the web link is in the chat and up here on the screen really quick. And that's for your use as an attendee to this course. So we'll go from there. So hopefully everybody can see my screen. Maybe if I can get one person in chat just to kind of verify for me that you can see the screen, that would be wonderful. And we will keep moving along. By the way, as we go throughout the class, there is the chat feature on your toolbar, and there's at the 3 dots that say more. Thank you, DC. And there's also the Q&A. I'll be answering these definitely by the end of the course, but as I'll be monitoring it as we go through the presentation. So don't hesitate to chat me or ask some question and answer so that I can address your questions before we're finished with this class. So let's talk about how to develop and manage a training program. Again, a critical part to any company, not just for safety and health, but really any subject. But obviously today we're focusing on safety and health. Why are we giving this and why are we giving it for free? Quite simply, we've been doing free weekly webinars. Normally we do a monthly free in-class training, but during this downtime, we decided to reach out and just help folks. You know, maybe you have extra time right now to think and revamp and go through your program and rethink some of your processes. So we'd like to just throw some thoughts out there and help maybe motivate some fresh ideas or re-stimulate some old ideas. So this is just part of our vision statement for Lawson. By 2030, we really want to take what we call our blueprint For safety management systems, not safety programs, there's a difference. And in fact, we have a webinar coming up on the new view of safety for occupational health and safety management systems here pretty soon. But we want to impact every business in the state. This is our community. We want to contribute and do our job and fill our role in helping spread the word and help make Hawaii safer and more prosperous for everybody. So it's simply part of our vision for our organization, one of the purposes that we exist for. You may have heard us talk about this or seen information about this safety intelligence concept. We're really trying to focus safety on effective, efficient, profitable, and smart management systems to implement our methodologies for safety and health and to integrate them into the rest of our business and our operational work practices, our culture, and our goals of our organizations. And so this is just a term that we have copywritten or trademarked called SQ. If you've ever taken an IQ test, like your intelligence quotient, then you can see the similarities to the term. There's emotional intelligence, or EQ. If you've ever read that book or taken the test to determine what your emotional quotient or your emotional intelligence is, that's how well you respond, read, react, and can interact with people on a social level, your sensitivities to that. And so we took the same concept of intelligence quotient, how smart we are about things, emotional intelligence, how sensitive we are to things, and how we can really be good leaders and get people to collaborate and cooperate with us. And we coined the term safety intelligence, which is really how well we integrate safety management systems into the workflow of our businesses and really help. My goal is for safety to be implemented in a manner that causes everyone to see working safely is a valuable tool, not just a philosophical, ethical issue, which it absolutely is, but it's actually a process that when integrated the right way can help our companies be more effective and more efficient, okay? And by all rights, it'd be lovely if someday we never knew that we were following a rule, we just did things a certain way because that was the smart, effective, intelligent way to do our business, all right? And when I say smart, that really is leading towards specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-oriented goals. Okay, so we're using that phrase and acronym there. All right, so this is me. I'm Tracy Lawson. I'm the president and founder of Lawson Associates. I have been working in the safety and health field for 30 plus years. I have a Bachelor of Science degree in safety and health and a few certifications, but most importantly, I really enjoy being in the field and help problem solve and put in place effective management systems. And that's really kind of my passion and life mission, is to, like I said, create working environments where we don't have to choose between people getting hurt or being productive. That's not even a fair choice, right? And where we can just focus on doing business the best way possible. So a little disclaimer for us here, we're providing a basic introduction to the development and management of training programs. There's no way in 2 hours I can cover every possible condition, scenario, or requirement. So the employer and competent persons and trainers are responsible to make sure these procedures and policies and management systems are appropriate to the work environment and the hazards present in your organization. So here's our objectives for today. After the completion of this course, you should be able to express why having a training program matters. And it sounds like a silly question, but sometimes it's hard to articulate. And I think folks who work in safety can probably liken this to trying to explain to somebody what it is we do every day, right? So why does it matter having a training program beyond just the general things of, well, we need education? We really need skill sets. We need deeper understanding, and the better intellectual property we can invest into our workers, the better results we're going to see in the field. And this is so fundamental to creating culture and creating efficiencies and effective work habits and work processes. It's having I probably should say having a good or proper training program, why that matters. You should be able to recognize key characteristics of a quality training program and a quality trainer. And those are things we should be evaluating judiciously. You should be able to develop a learner-centric training strategy based on adult learning methods. You should be able to apply effective methods for the design, delivery, evaluation, and continuous improvement of your training programs, and develop communication tactics to increase awareness and participation in the training program. So lots of things for us to talk about today. So why does having a training program matter? This is seems like a crazy question, like I mentioned, but there are so many reasons. Number one is regulatory. We are required by OSHA to have worker training on several different levels. I'll call the levels authorized person or awareness type level, competent person level, or qualified person level, okay, just for general descriptive terms today. But there are more than 100 current standards for OSHA that have requirements for training, and that's pretty extensive. So a comprehensive safety management system really depends on quality training that is not only conforming or compliant with the law, but is also achieving the purpose of changing behavior and integrating the concepts learned in training to putting them into practice. I saw a presentation yesterday I was looking at, and it talked about research to practice, and it was R2P, and it was from CWPR, the research group in the construction industry. Great presentation, and I thought this is the same concept. You know, you want to take the research you have and the information you gain and put it into practice. Well, in safety and in training, we need to take and be able to have our classes presented in a way that translates to real life practical application in the field. And again, that's one of the reasons why we create this safety pivot commitment, is to create accountability and create a purposeful strategic thought process to write down at least 3 things you learned, or you're going to go do different, or you're going to go research to implement. So the basis of training is to gain more education and knowledge, but we have to do something with that education and knowledge that betters the organization and us as people and professionals. So it's interesting. This is, I read an article about this, why does a training program matter? And when I was putting this all together, this came from an article called Building a Solid Training Program. Is actually an ebook by Alchemy, and they're a training organization. And it was about, why does a robust training program matter? And really, the 3 key elements that they talked about in this ebook were that, number one, the research suggests that effective training increases engagement of your employees, which is very important. There's always the issue of the disconnect between employee and management, or that we're in these 2 different boats, it's us versus them. And that's such a harmful mental model to be operating from. We really should be one team. And we do a lot of, we're really studying a lot of this human organizational performance and human error and learning teams, and being able to do pre-accident investigations and even post-accident investigations, or incident, if you will. And the engagement of our workforce, which you could see as the tip of a spear, right? They're out there doing the work, they have the feedback, they know what works, they have to adjust to all the different time constraints, other pressures and issues while still trying to follow the original plan, right? We need to get engagement from them to speak back to the blunt end of the stick, which is management, to make accurate adjustments to those plans and expectations so we can actually achieve ultimate performance. So work as planned versus work as done. And research shows that effective training helps increase this engagement that can have real impact on your bottom line. So it's not just sitting in a boring safety class or reading a paper at a safety meeting. It's actually creating engaging training that meets all the different training needs. We'll talk about types of learners today, but a course that actually translates into, what are you trying to achieve in the field through this course, and are you designing the class to accomplish those expectations? I've sat through many training classes and probably, unfortunately, given a few myself that really did not hit the mark in terms of what the need in the field was versus what the material and the point of the presentation was. And so that's the very first thing, our needs assessment and making sure we're engaging at the right level. Gallup data showed that businesses with the highest employee engagement outperform those with low engagement. So of course, if effective training can increase engagement, there are studies that show that this is a big value and benefit for our organizations across the board. And high turnover and safety incidents are quite often the result of ineffective training. And I can say from my own personal experience, and I'm sure some of you have run across this doing your investigations, that you go back and you see, well, somebody had training and maybe they attended the training class 5 times, and you're wondering how on earth could this behavior have existed or continued, or this knowledge gap have existed. And it really goes back to the quality and effectiveness of our training, and what we're, instead of just checking the box to say we talked about this regulation, actually translating it into meaningful, what's in it for me presentations for the workers or whoever our target audience is. So this is a quote from Tim Bushnell. He's an economist from NIOSH and through CDC. And he said, investing in prevention is like buying an insurance policy. You never know what you may have avoided by doing so. And I'd say the same thing applies for training. If we're doing good, effective, value-added training, we should be able to measure changes and improvements in the field, which I want to encourage you to do more of. You know, have very specific target goals that by providing, make something up, fall protection training and properly and emphasizing on the proper wearing of a harness and proper fall clearance calculations, we expect to see a 50% reduction in hazard observations in the field and 100% reduction of workers falling and striking the ground below, just for example, okay? After you do your training, what was the baseline needs assessment that told you you needed this? Maybe it was a bunch of observations related to fall hazard observations or an incident that occurred, okay? That created the need for the training. You go out and you now can measure a return on investment showing, look, this training directly translated, we can connect it and can directly translate it to an improvement in our observations and our performance in the field. But normally we don't do that part. We usually don't do the needs assessment, and we usually don't go back and measure in the field to say and show management that the use of the money and time spent to put the training program together to send workers to it actually had tangible return on investment in the field. And that's really important, okay? It's very important to show those measurements. So I love Larry Bloom. She's the president of Zelinsky Company. I love talking with her, and we were having one meeting, and she said to me, she said, it's better to train workers and have them leave than to not train workers and have them stay. And this stemmed from a conversation of, you know, in construction, we have a lot of rotating workforce or tradespersons who belong to unions, and we're constantly, you know, as our workforce rotates, we're constantly doing the same training over and over and over again. And, you know, there's some frustration there. And I'm sure everybody has had those thoughts if you haven't had those conversations. That's the type of industry we work in. So the discussion was, well, do we not train those workers or do we train them? And we were talking about, well, we're required by law to train them, but, you know, how far do you go? And then Larry made this really great statement that I think all of us who were in this conversation was like, yes, that's it. If you're not training those workers and they stay, what's that going to do to the quality of your organization versus if you train the workers and you give good training and they happen to leave for whatever reason, right? You've improved the industry and you've done a service to that worker and you've fulfilled your obligation as the employer and you got value from it while they were with you. And who knows, maybe they'll cycle back around and return at some point in time too. So to just say that, you know, we're not going to train people because they're cyclical. I've had folks tell me where they've had employees from professional employment organizations. Well, those aren't my employees, but they are. OSHA sees you as the employer if you're directing their work. And so, you know, it's important to understand we train because one, it's the law, but number two, because it adds value to us to get better performance in the field that's safe and effective and efficient, okay? So I just pulled some of these. It's hard to get current statistics off these. I've been digging around for anything newer than 2017. I pretty much check pretty frequently, but I chose to use this from a recent article that came out that was actually referencing this 2015-2016 study. Thought it was pretty comprehensive, but just to give you an idea of, how much money we spend on losses. And if we could take those funds and turn around and put a fraction of that into an effective, efficient training program, I truly believe we would see a tremendous reduction in these costs and these losses. So it's interesting that the cost of occupational injuries and deaths in 2016, the total cost to our society as a whole was $151 billion. That's crazy. Almost 50 billion was in wage and productivity losses, administrative expenses, 33 billion in medical expenses, 12 billion in employers' uninsured costs. Those are the costs out of your pocket. 4.7 billion for motor vehicle damages and 2.7 for fire-related losses. And really, the injury impact per worker was about $1,000, and that includes the value of goods or services each worker had to produce to offset the cost of work injuries. So it's not the average cost of a work-related injury, that's the offset cost. And then they talked about, $32,000 cost per medically consulted injury, and that includes estimate of wages loss, medical expenses, administrative expenses, employer costs. So when we talk about costs, we're not just talking about here's how much the treatment costs. It's all these other elements that are included: wages, medical, administrative, employer oversight. Okay. So this is a chart of some of the more expensive injury types, again, by the average cost per workers' compensation claim. And you can see, obviously, motor vehicle, until recently, we spend the majority of our time in our vehicles traveling to and from. So that's no surprise that is the highest for the cause of injuries. But we have burns, falls, slips, caught betweens, and struck bys. And if you heard the term Focus 4 before, those are the top 4 activities within the construction industry that attribute to about 80% of the deaths in our industry, and they're right along those caught between, struck by, falls, and electrical. Okay. So by nature of injury and by body part, those are interesting. It's just trying to raise your awareness and attention to how much money we spend every year on loss, on injury, and what would our company, what would our state, what would our country and our world look like if we were able to make a huge dent in this and take some of those funds and proactively pour them into our workforce, pour them into our organizations, and have highly effective, highly efficient, highly knowledgeable workforces. It still always amazes me when I go out in the field and I do observations, the wide variety that I come across from just supervision to employees and their knowledge of what it is they're doing, how to even use their tools and equipment, let alone safely, right? And what it is, what's the process and the why behind the what. This area is so ripe for improvement. I think I have another class about authorized, competent, and qualified persons. Some of you may have attended this. And we talk about how we could make such a huge impact in our industry immediately if we just, focused on the competent person role and how, really truly meeting the needs and the expectation of that position in the field. Okay, so really something to think about that I think this ties in very closely. So the next thing to talk about, this is the state of Hawaii. This is the Hawaii Administrative Rule 12-110-2, and this talks about safety and health programs. And I want to focus on just the words for a second, because I really believe words have meaning, okay? And the order of things and the specific use of certain words, it matters, it makes a difference. And so what is the title of this section? It's titled Programs. It's not titled one class or this class. It's talking about a program. That's a management system, okay? And so it says that this standard applies to all employers with employees doing business in our state, okay? And the first in this general requirement talks about that every employer shall, that means we must, right, comply with state laws and standards regarding a safe place of employment and safe practices. And then this is some really specific language here. It says, and shall do everything reasonable and necessary to protect the life, safety, and health of the employees. That is our burden by law. That is the standard that we are held to in a court of law. And that is the expectation of the minimum requirements of every business in the state through your safety and health program. That we shall do everything reasonable and necessary to protect the life, safety, and health of our employees. Okay. Beyond that, there are other elements that talk about training that tie into this subject for today. And the first one talks about that the employer shall ensure that practices are understood. That word understood, that means not that someone just attended a class. We have to have verification of comprehension. We have to ensure that our workers, our supervisors, our managers understood what is required of them and how they are to do their job safely. Okay, so it's not just a, you were present, you get a certificate, thank you for coming to class, I can put your name on the list and you're now a competent person. That doesn't work. They have to understand and apply this knowledge, right? So the practices are understood by all employees, and it's underscored through, in no mistake in the order of this, through training, through positive reinforcement, recognizing the behaviors that we want to see continue, through correction of unsafe performance, recognizing and expressing what we want clearly so we can avoid misunderstandings, right? Correction of unsafe performance. And if necessary, a clearly defined and communicated disciplinary system, right? So before we write people up, send them home, do whatever, unless it's absolutely life-threatening, we need to ask ourselves, did we properly train them so they really understood what they were supposed to be doing? Did we provide oversight and reinforcement of the correct, proper work methods? Or did we walk by the wrong thing every day for the last week and not say anything until somebody else came up and told us, oh, this can't be, and then we decided to say something like somebody's not wearing their glasses, or they're not wearing their seatbelt on the forklift, or I could list a million things, right? Are we not correcting, or are we correcting unsafe performance? And have we done all those things? And if we have, we've clearly defined and communicated our disciplinary system, and now making a decision to put that into action. This portion of the standard talks about safety and health training, and it's interesting that 2 out of the 3 sections talk about supervisor and manager training. And I find this pretty commonly where we do have training programs. It's usually where there has to be a regulatory need, there's a deficiency or a gap in some knowledge basis, and somebody's asking for the certification. In some cases, we have a program and we're rotating all our employees through this training, but our managers and our supervisors, well, we assume because you're a manager or supervisor, you know this stuff by heart and you're perfect and you don't need to come to the class, which that would be nice, wouldn't it? Okay, I need to go to training, everybody does. And if we're not properly equipping our supervisors and managers, we're actually creating a barrier in the field that where we're training our new employees or our employee or tradesperson level, and they're going out and they have new information, they have a motivation to want to comply, and what they've been trained is different than what they see and do in the field. They approach their supervisor, whether they do it well or not, and the supervisor feels threatened because they're being questioned. And right then and there, we have a conflict and a barrier to ever having that employee speak about safety again, because more often than not, the response is, do what I say, I'm your boss. I don't care what you learned in class. That's a problem. If I only had a limited budget for safety, I would conduct as much training as I could to pour into my supervisors and managers to help make them the smartest, most well-trained, well-rounded supervisors that you would ever find. Because those smart, well-rounded, well-trained supervisors are the ones making decisions. They're the ones leading and establishing culture in the field, and they're the ones who are going to make our program make or break. That's just the cold, hard facts. Now, that doesn't mean we don't train our employees, but maybe if we have limited budgets, we then use the trickle-down theory and we train into our supervisors and managers, and then they go train the other workers at the authorized end user field level. Okay, so some things to think about. So 3 elements here. The first one says that the employer has to develop and institute a safety and health training program. Again, a program, what is that? That's something that's established. It has criteria, it has a schedule. We know what the needs are of the people who are participating in the program. We've done a needs analysis. We've established what the rules require for certain training, who needs which courses, how frequently, what's the criteria for retraining besides the frequency required or recommended by regulation, but if there's maybe behavioral changes or evidence in the field that something didn't stick, we retrain based on that. This isn't just a knee-jerk, last-minute, oh my gosh, somebody asked us for our certs and we don't have it, or I get these calls all the time. I need 24-hour fall protection training. My job starts next week. And I'm like, how did that happen? How does that happen? If you're working in an industry, knowing what the criteria is across the board and making sure you're staying ahead. So no matter what personnel you have, you can rotate, you have flexibility, you have people who are trained as backups, and everybody is on the same sheet of music in terms of what the requirements are. Okay, so a training program. And this is for all employees. So that includes managers, supervisors, line employees, office employees. Every single level within your organization has some level of hazard and some level of training that they're required to have. And this training should give them the understanding of those hazards that they may be exposed to, the procedures and practices to protect themselves from those hazards. That's the basic level for everyone. So supervisors and managers are to be trained in the elements of the employer safety and health program. I challenge you as one of your pivot points for today to make a note and go out and check and ask any supervisor or manager what their specific responsibility is to them under your safety and health program, right? And then depending on their answer, ask yourself, how did we get in the position we're in where maybe they do know their role? That's great. Ask them, how did you know that that was the requirement, right? Let's go find out what's working right too, by the way, okay? How did you know that you were responsible for X, Y, Z? And they may tell you, oh, well, in my orientation, or I attended a meeting, or my supervisor reinforces this with me all the time, or they may say in my other company, right? So let's find out the source of that knowledge. And if there's a gap in the knowledge, let's figure that out too, okay? You may have talked about this at their orientation. They may not even have a copy of your safety and health program. And by the way, just giving somebody a written copy of your program doesn't fulfill this obligation, right? Or a one-time orientation. This is teaching them, training them how to walk out those responsibilities, okay? Not just orienting or informing. There's a difference. And then the employer has to ensure that the supervisors and managers understand their responsibilities. That's a verification of comprehension. What are you doing to make sure of that? Are you checking in the field? Are you requiring them to pass an exam? I think it should be a combination of several things. Are you seeing it as evidenced in how they're running their crews and their work? You know, how do you know there was comprehension of their responsibilities? And how do they know, how are you communicating that they are important to the safety and health of the workplace? There's a big gap and disconnect more often than not between managers thinking that safety and health is the safety person's responsibility and production and operations is the supervisor's responsibility. And that is such a slippery slope. That is so dangerous, and it is so in error. Okay, that's what we call a mental model, that belief system that safety is the safety person's job and everything else is the supervisor's job. That's crazy. I just sat through a pre-activity meeting right before this training where it was a pretty good meeting, pretty good presentation. The supervisor for an upcoming activity walked us through their job plan, walked us through in their job plan. It included quality control, stop points, checkpoints, everything else. And then they asked everybody if anybody had any questions. And I said, well, yes, I have some questions about safety. And I'm wondering why safety is a totally separate document. You've integrated quality control into your plan. Why didn't you integrate the safety elements for each step into your plan? And talk about it as you describe the work to us. So there's this disconnect, right? That, oh, the safety person's going to go over the hazard analysis. Why? You're the supervisor running the work. Why don't you? And to me, that indicates a lack of understanding in the responsibilities of the program and how important the manager is. Okay. So it says that in particular, training for managers and supervisors has to enable them to recognize potential hazards, maintain safety and health protection in the work area, and reinforce employee training in the nature of the potential hazards and required protective measures. So same thing in this pre-activity today, since I can use that, it's real-time, real-life experience. As we talk through some of these issues, I truly believe that if the supervisory team had better knowledge and grasp and understanding of their role in the program and their ability to recognize the hazards and the details of that, that they would have chosen to do the work a little bit differently. And I know that they're going back to the drawing board after our discussion to look at a few elements that how they chose to do the work actually created more constraints than removing constraints, okay? So just some things to think about, that this safety training can absolutely have a direct impact on your production. It can have a direct impact on your planning methodologies, right? Wouldn't it be nice to plan the work, include all the different disciplines, because one decision affects others, right? How operations or production decides to change a particular activity could impact quality positively or negatively. It could impact safety positively or negatively, but we keep planning in these vacuums or in these silos. If we could get everybody trained to the same level of knowledge, then that could actually enable them to have a much more comprehensive plan the first time out the door, okay? Then there's always this general requirement for competence. And I look at this under the HIOSH standard as an across-the-board general requirement for competent person supervision. There are specific standards that absolutely call out competent person supervision is required, but if it's silent, it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It means this general requirement comes into play. And it says that when work's to be performed by or under the supervision of a designated person, that person shall have the degree of competence necessary to perform or direct the work in a safe manner. So that's just a general bottom line. You know, what's your company program and process for training all the different levels? And if you want to make a promotion from, let's say, an employee to a lead person or 4-person job or superintendent or management role, what are the learning objectives or the skill set criteria that they need to have in order to do that job? Or where are the gaps of what's expected and what they have, and how are you going to fill those in? And safety, absolutely. Safety knowledge and competency in that element is a key criteria. And so this is just a catch-all general requirement under the state of Hawaii's general requirements in construction for competency and competent supervision, okay? So good for us to know how the law, what the minimum requirements are, how the law looks at our behaviors, and what that baseline expectation is. Not what we think in our mind and what we've always done, okay, but what's actually what's required. So it's really about switching mindsets towards safe production or effectiveness or efficiency, if you think about it. And normally when I start these classes off, I didn't do this today, but I normally say, hey, you know, anytime you attend a training, you really should encourage you to stop for a second and say, okay, kind of a reset. What am I here for? I'm here to challenge myself to disprove what I think I knew already about safety and health training and what we're doing. I want to disprove, because if you just listen, most people just listen to prove what they think they already knew, and they're going to be like, oh yeah, I didn't learn anything from that class. She just said everything that I already knew. Instead of being like, oh, I wonder what new things I could learn or what things I could challenge myself with. I thought I knew about how to set up a training program, but there was one thing that was discussed at today's training that I need to go back and find more information on, right? So it's a total reverse concept of disprove what you think you know, right? So just a challenge for that. So let's see here. So let's talk a little bit about characteristics of a quality trainer and training program. So first of all, if you attend any of my courses, you'll get the hint that I absolutely love the ANSI standards. I think they are wonderful guidance tools for us, and in some cases, For example, if you work on military projects, or some other owners incorporate these by reference into their contract documents. But otherwise, they are current, they're up to date, they're consensus standards, meaning these are put together by subject matter experts within all disciplines of an industry. So it could be regulatory folks, it could be manufacturer representatives, it could be safety professionals from companies, it could be consulting firms, you get the idea. So it's a bunch of different perspectives, folks with different perspectives on the same subject coming together to create what's hopefully a pretty well-rounded document for us to then use to make our programs better. Okay, so this one in particular, I'm going to use the 2016 version of this. This is the ANSI ASSP. So the American National Standards Institute and the American Society for Safety Professionals is responsible for this particular standard. They have ownership of it in terms of what's leading the content development. And this is what's called the Z490.1. There's also a Z490.2. And this is the criteria for accepted practices in safety and health and environmental training. The .2 version of the standard talks about online training, okay? So much of what we're going through today, we have checked and balanced to this document. There's the some other documents like the ISET ANSI standard for adult education and continuing education credits. We're actually in the process of going through and getting our company certified right now to be able to issue those, I hope, by the end of the year. It's actually a very grueling process, but well worth the undertaking. So training delivery skills. What does the ANSI standard say about trainers? And the first thing is that it says that the trainer should have good training delivery skills. They should be competent in delivery techniques and different methods that are appropriate for adult learners. And I could dive into that paragraph alone for about another hour and talk about techniques and methods and adult learners. But I will say this, it is important to have strategy and tactics and how you're deploying your training program and the different courses that you're presenting. And so understanding who your audience is and what the specific training needs and targets of those needs are and the purpose of the training for that group, and to make sure that the techniques that you use to deliver the information and material are relevant, are interesting, can get people engaged in the learning process and create a learning event, okay? And so it means they learned something. Something sparked in their mind and they said, oh my gosh, I didn't know that, or I thought that was different, or I didn't understand that, okay? So that a learning event has occurred. And adult learners, we're tricky. We're very tricky. You think about children, from the minute they're born, they have this innocent belief in whatever an adult tells them that is true, and they soak up that information all throughout, you know, their formative years, and just take, for the most part, everything as fact. And well, if my mom said this, you know, then it must be true, and that's what I believe. As adults, you know, we have experience. We created our own life experiences. We've created our own work experiences. Maybe we had good experiences with safety people in certain companies and on a certain project, and that really positively reinforced safety in our relationship with how the program or the safety management system works, and the safety professionals that are there to help support, or even supervisors who were very well-rounded and competent in the work and reinforced a safety culture. You get the idea, right? All our decisions and beliefs as to whether something's true or not come from our personal experiences. And so that's why sometimes when I do a class, I tell people, you know, your sponge is full, your brain is full, you've formed all these opinions about whatever subject matter it is we're talking about. Squeeze out just a little bit of that sponge to make room for some new information, okay? So every time you say something to an adult learner, and you guys are probably doing this in class already, right? You think about how it applies to you, you question what I said, you may disagree, you may agree. You're basing everything that I said based on your perspective and your life experience. That's natural. So if we're training, we should expect that from our students, and we should be prepared to use the appropriate techniques and methods to provide good, sound information to create this learning event, okay? So the other thing is the qualification of these trainers, and they should be able to have documentation. That means, you know, you could be a subject matter expert, an industry expert in fall protection harnesses, or confined space entry into manholes, or cranes. You get the idea. It doesn't really matter what the subject is. You don't have to be a certified degree teacher. Some people are great natural instructors. Some people can learn to be better teachers. Some people enjoy it. Some people don't. But you do need to have qualifications. You do need to have a basis that you can validate your opinion or the information that you're presenting, okay? I think we've all sat in classes where we had excellent instructors and we were like, wow, that person knows what they're talking about. They're confident. They have no problem answering any questions, even questions that may challenge whatever it is they're presenting. And they have a solid grasp on the material. They can tell stories. They can give perspective. That was a great instructor, right? That's what we're looking for. So does the instructor, they should be able to validate this, you know, do they have any certificates? A resume or a CV, any experience sheets? Do they have any certifications? What are you presenting to me that if I'm going to come to your class, you are qualified to present the information to me as an authority, if you think about it that way, right? So that information should be readily available. I know for us, anybody who asks us, we put information out on our website, and when we're talking about our classes, about who's our instructor, normally it's me. I have, I think, 2 other instructors. We don't allow everybody to do training in our company. There's certain criteria that folks have to meet in order to be able to do that. And we go through and qualify our instructors on our own. But one is that you should have either like a certified instructional trainer certification from the Board of Certified Safety Professionals. And that tells us that you have a solid grasp of basic criteria to establish and conduct an effective training program, okay? Then you should have experience in the subject matter that you're talking about. And you should be a good trainer with competent delivery techniques and skills for adult learners, okay? And we keep all this information, and I think I've had a handful of times where somebody's asked me, hey, what are your qualifications for this class? They're trying to get the class approved to come to one of our courses. I have no problem providing all that information immediately, and even in-depth detail about our courses. So if somebody comes to one of our classes and it gets questioned about the content or anything, we can provide all the backup and all the basis for everything. And that's something for you to either set your program up to be able to do that, or something for you to check for the people that you're using as third-party trainers. Because remember, employer, even though you use third-party trainers, which is great, I am one, okay, and we use them too, you're still responsible for the content. And let's say I give a fall protection class for you, but there's no way I can talk about all the specific equipment that's going to be used on 3 of your different projects. So I'll give the agenda. As the employer, I need to know there's these 3 gaps: the specific equipment, you know, hands-on training on that equipment, and maybe hands-on rescue that was not able to be covered in this class. I'm still responsible for as the employer. Really important. And in fact, in some of the areas of regulations, forklifts, for example, if you use a third-party trainer to certify your powered industrial truck operators, as the employer, you're actually supposed to document the date that you accepted that third-party trainer's course for your folks. So important to understand that it's not just, I'll just send them over there and you're good. There are obligations across the board, and this should be part and parcel of your training program, whether it's internal or external training providers. There are going to be gaps and things that need to be followed up on, okay? So some of the folks that you may have as instructors or putting together your training material are called subject matter experts and SMEs. And same thing, these folks should have an appropriate level of technical knowledge, skill, or ability in the subjects they're teaching or the programs they're developing or creating. I was speaking to somebody who was a very good training program development professional. This was about 2 weeks ago. And she was giving me an example of that she was hired by a company to create a forklift training program for them to certify their operators. And she was talking about certain things, and the technical terms she was using weren't industry terms. And so I was like, wow. I said, well, did somebody else work with you on putting this program together? She said, nope. I went and researched it myself and I put it all together. And I thought to myself, she needed a subject matter expert. She was the SME for training and program development, but she really needed somebody who understands powered industrial trucks, OSHA, and other safety criteria that could come into play to help look at and give input into her material. Okay, so quite often, one person doesn't fit the bill for every SME element that's needed to put a training program together, okay? And same thing like with continuing education. Your SMEs, your trainers, they should be continuously learning. I like to call our company a learning organization. We're continuously out there trying to find new information, new ideas, new perspectives. And so we do a lot of individual training with our employees and even myself. You know, I'm going through other classes right now just to challenge myself and grow. And any trainer you talk to should be doing continuing education, especially if they have certifications, right? So how are they staying relevant and how are they staying up to speed on the technical elements that they're training on or creating programs for? So I mentioned this a little bit earlier. This is called the CIT. This is the Certified Instructional Trainer through the Board of Certified Safety Professionals. If you're somebody who does training or wants to do training, you know, it doesn't mean you know everything and you're the world's best instructor because you have this certification. But what it does show is a certain level of commitment. It shows a certain level of knowledge and that you've achieved a certain level of comprehension. This exam isn't easy, and it's really based on learning concepts like Bloom's taxonomy and a bunch of Kirkpatrick's model and a bunch of other theories that exist out there for adult education, for verification of comprehension and assessment, and even how to put together effective programs and the different learning techniques and the different you know, styles and presentation methods. So, and the different delivery modes, like, do I do this training in person? Would this training be an acceptable option for an online virtual course like today's webinar? Or would this be a great course to put on an on-demand web-based course? In fact, I will mention we should be launching here within the next month. We will launch our Safety Intelligence Institute. It will be an online, web-based, on-demand training portal where you can take all of our courses that we offer in live or virtual. You'll be able to take on demand as well. We'll still be putting out, when we get back to live training, in-person training, we'll still be conducting that. But we'll also be offering opportunities to do training like this, virtual. We've done a couple classes with Zoom meeting where we can see all the students and interact as if we're in a classroom. And then, so this will be our web-based portion of that. So a CIT is an exam that makes sure that the folks who are putting together programs have certain basic information. And obviously this is focused on safety training, right? Since it's through the Board of Certified Safety Professionals, okay? So what are the characteristics of quality training programs? And this is important. So number one, they need to be accurate. I think everybody would agree that that sounds pretty basic. Whatever you're teaching needs to be accurate, but I'm sure we've all attended classes where maybe something was put out that wasn't accurate. So it's really important that nobody's perfect, first of all, I'm sure not, but it's important that as the developer of a program or the instructor, that you understand the material you are teaching. You are the SME, okay? So training material should be prepared by qualified individuals, and we know the difference between competent and qualified. Qualified has a significant definition, and someone who has extensive knowledge or experience in the subject matter, okay? These need to be updated as needed. So I know we go through our course material at least annually, and that's a lot because we have a lot of classes. And so that's a detailed review of the material. Is it still relevant? Is it still appropriate? And absolutely, is it accurate to what we know, to how work is performed today, and the different equipment or materials or regulations that are required as of today, okay? This needs to be updated. It needs to be facilitated by appropriately qualified and experienced individuals using appropriate training techniques and methods, okay? So it needs to be accurate. It needs to be credible. That's very important too. Our facilitators of the training should have good safety and health backgrounds or be SMEs in safety and health related fields. They should have experience in training adults. We talked about that adults are a little bit tricky, or they should have experience working with the target audience that they're teaching to. Practical experience in safety and health is very important, as well as experience in training facilitation. So it's almost a dual expertise, a cross-trained person. This will contribute to a higher degree of credibility and a better experience for the student, okay? It needs to be clear. Training programs, sometimes our safety subjects are so complicated. Confined space is a great example of that. So many people get confused about the confined space regulation. The trainer needs to be accurate, credible, and very clear, taking a complex subject and breaking it down into clear, understandable elements, okay? So programs have to be accurate, they have to be believable or credible, but they have to be clear and understandable to the participant. And so who is your audience again? If I'm teaching a confined space class to a group of experienced safety professionals, I'm probably going to be a lot more technical than I would to a group of tradespersons who this is their first introduction to confined space and what it is. And they're coming at the, just the authorized person level. They're the authorized entrance, okay? So if the material is only understandable to somebody who has like a college education or somebody who's worked in the field and understands all the jargon, we have so many acronyms and different terms in our industry of safety, let alone construction or whatever your other fields are. It's crazy, and it could be very confusing and frustrating for the participant. I know I was at a meeting the other day and I said something that had probably 10 acronyms in it, and I looked at the other person and I said, I don't think anybody else but you and me could have understood what I just said. That was so much jargon I just threw at you. And we kind of laughed and moved on. But it's true. Sometimes we don't even notice the slang or the jargon or the terminology. And so we have to make sure we catch ourselves when we're teaching these classes. So sorry if I've been doing that today. So training material should be written in the language and grammar of everyday speech. That is important, okay? If any of you haven't heard of this tool, I love it. It's a program you can download. They have a free version. It's called Grammarly. Oh, this thing has been such a great teacher for me. I've been using it for over a year. I use it on my emails. I use it on the programs that I write. And it's really taught me and helped me kind of work out some of my bad grammar habits. So, but we want to talk like we talk every day, okay? So speak in your training program and on your slides the way you would speak every day, and make it sure that it's appropriate, again, to the participant, to who your target audience is. So if you're developing a training program, we need to make sure that the readability and the language choices that we use match our intended audience. If our audience doesn't speak or comprehend English, then we've got to take steps to make sure that we're addressing the training instruction and providing it in a language that an employee can understand. And that means having good, trusted resources to take your material in English and translate it to your language or languages that are needed. So same thing, if your target audience's vocabulary is limited, or there may be evidence of low literacy, then that needs to be accounted for, and we need to be able to teach to that level of knowledge. It's important, words matter, right? And people who are fluent in another language other than English, they may have low literacy because English is a second language. It doesn't mean that they're dumb. It means that the language we're speaking isn't hitting the mark for them, and it's not their primary language. So we need to adjust to accommodate for all those factors. I often tell myself, how would I feel if I was sitting in a class, in France or in Japan or somewhere else, I'd be listening for words, watching how the instructor's talking, looking at their pictures, because I'd have no idea what the words meant. And so make sure that you're doing an assessment that says, as part of your needs analysis, do you have English as a second language students? Is that your target audience? And have you accommodated and adjusted for that adequately? And I know here in Hawaii, that's a real issue, okay? Is it practical? Is the training program, does it have information and ideas and skills that the participant sees as directly useful to them and their working life? And so what's in it for them, right? Do they see value? And are they successfully transferring those learning concepts from the classroom or the learning event to the workplace? And can we measure and see that? And can the participant immediately see value in applying what they learned in their training session to the workplace? And can supervision see that? And so has there been discussion and coordination of expectations? And you know, if I'm doing training internally in my company, I'll talk to my managers and say, okay, we just trained these employees in this subject. Let's watch for this in the field. Let's reinforce the things they learned that they're showing that they are doing well. And let's make immediate corrections to the things that are still learning gaps, right? And so there's always a follow-up. I'll talk about this probably later on, but there's something called Ebbinghouse's forgetting curve. And this is so important. It's a study done by Ebbinghaus, and he studied adult learning, and he found that after a learning event, 5 touches after a learning event, spread out in time, could take a learning comprehension from 10% after a class up to 90% just through that reinforcement process. So one of the things on our Safety Intelligence Institute that we'll be doing at the end of each web-based, on-demand driven class is, it's called drips, and we'll have 5 follow-up drips. We're also looking at putting in place some other tools that will be good follow-up tools for folks to be able to enhance and just drill down and reinforce the training that you just had and key learning concepts that you just went through. So that's important for you to understand in terms of putting your programs together. So engaging. Is the program engaging? Does it capture the participants' attention? Is it motivating them to participate and change behavior? And most importantly, does it create a sense of urgency? I think some of the best classes that I ever attended, I left feeling panicked slightly. And I don't mean that in a negative way, but I felt motivated. I felt a sense of urgency, like, oh my gosh, I have to get back and look into this, or I have to get back and make this change, or I have to go back and research this further. That is evidence, a performance indicator, a key indicator of that the class was engaging. It got my attention and it created a call to action for me. And then last but not least is that it needs to be relevant. And we've touched on this a little bit. The training should be as focused to the participants' work as possible, right? What's in it for me is the bottom line, and that a worker can make that connection between what they learned in class and translate that to the performance in their production in the field. So let's talk a little bit about learner-centric training methods and adult learning methods. I threw some higher learning elements in here because I know I have a broad base of participants today, but this learner-centric training and adult learning methods is important. So learner-centric, this means that we're designing training for how people learn. And so there needs to be a little bit of studying in this. If you look at our resource material, there's a great article again on learner-centric training, and to develop this, it's by Jeff Dalto, and this is published in the Professional Safety Journal. It's the May 2017 version, and it just talks about how do people learn, and more importantly, how do adults learn, because these are different principles, and they actually talk about the Z490 standard in this article. They talk about doing this needs assessment that we've been discussing periodically today, and really gives you some ideas and, I guess, direction, you know, to how people can learn. And so I'm going to talk about this in just a minute. I took this next slide from Jeff's article, just to give credit where credit's due, because I think he's actually really a brilliant trainer and a program developer. But it's important to deliver training that nurtures the development of knowledge. We want to advance people's skills. And I think one of my pet peeves is people going to the same class given by maybe a vendor, not that anything's wrong with that, but the same level of class every single time. You know, there is something to be said for general information or even manufacturer-centric, manufacturer-specific training. Very valuable, especially if let's say I'm going to go work with a certain self-retracting lifeline. That vendor works with that lifeline all the time. They know the manufacturer's material, or they should, and they are a great resource for me to get more information on that retractable. Or another good example, a confined space air monitor. Fabulous resource for that. And in fact, even the manufacturer itself, okay? But once I've gone to that class, if I just keep taking the same class over and over again and the material isn't changing, that's not going to help. Now I will say, like with our classes, we revise our course material every year. So, and update it and try and make it relevant and change things, because to a certain extent, regulations don't change. And some of this material, it may be so extensive that you need to go through it a couple times before you learn it. But be digging deeper. That's the point. We're getting ready to put together an advanced competent person class for several of our subject matters. We're probably going to roll that out in 2021. But I'm excited about it because as an instructor, I want to teach more technical stuff and get super detailed. I love teaching every class we have, but you know, we should be looking at and saying, are there other resources out there that we could use to further develop our own training or the training and knowledge of the personnel that we're responsible for, okay? So is the training we're developing nurturing the development and the expansion and the growth of the knowledge and skills that our audience has at each step in the process here? So this is just a little bit about how people learn. And beyond using adult learning principles, if you're going to create an effective training, safety training, as a trainer, we need to understand how people learn. And here's what cognitive psychology research and learning experts say about the human learning process. Okay, so this is a little technical. They say that at any moment, a person is flooded with stimulus in their sensory memory. Okay. And so people focus on some of those stimuli and then they filter out the rest of them. Remember a minute ago I said, hey, don't filter out what you don't know, filter out what I've said that you already do know, or look to disprove that, right? Trying to change what your filter is for today's class. People process stimuli that gets attention in their working memory, right? So making it relevant, engaging, making it personal for them. What do they see that they're going to get value out of? The working memory can hold only a few bits of information, like 4 or 5 bits of information, okay? And it can retain that information for only a short time, sometimes only as often as 10 to 15 seconds, okay? If a person doesn't actively process this new information or they move it into the long-term memory, it's essentially lost within 20 seconds, okay? So some of the information from our working memory is transferred to long-term memory, but not everything. And that's why retraining is so important, and using different engaging methods to create and capture those moments, okay? That's why you may say, oh my gosh, you've been through this class 5 times. Well, how engaged did we make the learner, and how much of this information were we able to capture? Or just by the way people learn, it's lost. So it's nothing that person is incapable of learning. It has to potentially do with the factors of how we presented the information and just how we learn as human beings and adults, okay? So again, some information is transferred from working memory to long-term memory, and some information is stored in long-term memory and we're able to retrieve it and use it at appropriate moments on the job. And that's really the part that we're looking for and trying to accomplish in the learning process, or how people learn, okay? So it's important to deliver training that nurtures the development of knowledge and skills in each step of this process. And so it's really important to have learner-centric focused training, and that's what we're talking about. So let's talk a little bit about adult learning principles, especially for safety training. And really we have a couple different subjects here. Well, let me go back one second. the first thing I want to talk about a little bit are that adults are voluntary learners, first of all. Whether you're forced to come to a class or not, you only learn on a voluntary basis. We cannot force anyone to learn anything that they don't want to. Okay, that's really important. So how we prep people to attend a class, how we gain interest, or how we engage them, not just in the classroom, but pre-classroom and post-classroom is very important. And so most adults learn because they want to, right? Like hopefully you're here today, this is free, you came because you want to learn something, and so you're learning best when you decided that you had a need for this particular reason, okay? Or for this particular subject. The other thing is that adults learn needed information pretty quickly, right? So if I need something, I'm gonna go out and find it, I'm gonna learn it, I got it, okay? So that tells us that an adult needs to see the subject matter we're talking about and the methods that we're using as relevant. We talked about that a minute ago, relevant to what they do, relevant to their life, relevant to their workplace and their community and their environment and the culture that they work within. They have a right to know why information is important to them, okay? Adults come typically with a good deal of life experience, and that needs to be acknowledged. Every single person who walks into your classroom or into your training event, they should be encouraged to share their experiences and knowledge and their input. Now today we're in a webinar. It's really I'm lecturing session for today. We're trying to reach out a little bit in chat, and if you have questions, but this is an important aspect when we're doing training in groups, is to understand and respect people's life experiences, whether they're true and accurate, whether they're good or bad, okay? And adults need to be treated with respect, 100%, okay? The minute you lose credibility as an instructor because you've offended somebody, whether you were right or wrong doesn't matter. No student wants to sit in a class where the instructor treats someone else disrespectfully, because that means they could do that to you too, okay? And the minute that happens, whether you talk down to somebody or you ignore their ideas or concerns, credibility is chipped away at, and participation and value from the learning event for everybody is compromised. Adults learn more when they participate in the learning process. So it means we need to be involved actively in participating. And, you know, I, for one, I am not a big fan of corny games or things that are there just to waste my time. So the activities that you do need to be relevant. They need to be applicable to the job. I don't like to play games. I sat in a class the other day and they started off the class, and for 20 minutes of my valuable time, the instructor wasted it playing a silly game of, can you figure out the word with the letters mixed up? And I was mad. At that point, they lost me. I didn't hear a single thing, and I was super like negative in my head for probably the next hour till I caught myself and I said, you know, look, you have to sit here and go through this class, so you better snap out of it and get what you're here to get, or you're not going to pass the test, right? All from just a poorly chosen activity at the beginning that didn't consider the audience, didn't consider treating the participants with respect of their time. You know, think about that. If you do a test, do a pilot, see what other people think about those activities if you're going to use those in your class, okay? But adults learn best by doing and participating. Even if participating is highlighting something, I tell people all the time, take notes. The more you take notes, it actually engages your brain. It helps your memory. It helps you add value to the class to write down things that are relevant and things that I'm talking about that aren't in every single word I say isn't in the material that you're looking at, right? So taking notes and catching things, practicing what you're learning. Also, if we're going to give a class on harnesses for fall protection, well, it's really great if, even if it's a virtual class, you can bring your own harness to the virtual class, put it on, and we can observe and give feedback the same we would in a real live in-person class, okay? So you sometimes got to get more creative when we're in this virtual environment right now. So making sure people engage and practice knowledge and skills in class. Adults need to know where they're heading. What's the route map? What's the clear objective? What am I here for? And what am I going to get from it that's going to build on what I already knew? And adults learn best when new information is reinforced and repeated. You'll hear me repeat several things throughout the class today, and that's not because I didn't realize I already said it. I'm trying to create an opportunity to make sure you grab that information and store it in your long-term memory. And it's really important. There's certain things that really need to be mastered for certain knowledge, skills, and attitudes, and that needs to be reinforced throughout the course. And of course, adults learn better when information is presented in different ways. And so we have all different varieties of teaching techniques. We have different types of learners, and these are the things that we really need to focus on, okay? So we talked about that we want to treat trainees with respect. We want to recognize and respond to individual learning styles. We want to exercise professional judgment in managing difficult situations or difficult participants. Are you prepared with what you're going to say if somebody's a sniper, or what you're going to say if somebody is distracting, being like the comedian of the group, or what you're going to do if people won't speak and talk or engage? They just sit there and stare at you when you call on them. You know, think about these difficult situations and what are healthy, constructive ways to step back and re-engage. Show flexibility in your tone, slow the class down if you need to, accommodate the needs of the trainees. If you're going slow and the class is getting bored, speed it up. If you're going too fast and you're losing the class, which you need to be measuring for, you need to slow it down, right? Coach and counsel trainees to maximize the learning experience. Engage in relevant discussion. Have good, thoughtful questions that you're going to engage folks with, and be prepared for a variety of responses and how you're going to respond to certain questions. Value people's experiences that are varied. We have all different levels of experience, levels of training that folks are coming into the room with. It's not uncommon for me to teach a class that I've got folks who've been doing this, and this is their 5th time through a class. They've been working in the field as a competent person, and then they're sitting next to somebody that this is their first time in the class. So as the instructor, you need to be able to acknowledge both learning levels and be able to present the class in a way that is healthy and effective for both levels, right? And again, encouraging participation is very important. So just remember, who are the adult learners? What are they typically made of? Like life experiences, respect their goals, figure out what motivates them. Remember, they're self-directed. So like today, we've given you a bunch of resources to go back if you want to learn more. We've given you some good starting points of how to dig deeper, right? Adults are typically task-oriented and they want to feel respected. I think everybody does. I don't come anywhere to be disrespected, right? Okay, let's move on and talk a little bit about design of our class, delivery and evaluation of our courses. And this in itself could be a week-long course just on that subject alone, okay? Just for fair warning. But there are several different methods of training. I'm just going to talk about one that I, in particular, like. It doesn't mean that the other ones are poor, but it's just a different methods that are out there to develop your content. But the first thing is really, you may not have a training department. In our company, we do have a training division, and like I said earlier, it consists of 3 people. Okay, and so I fill several roles within that department, but just have a structure and understand what different support folks, it could be third parties, it could be folks who work in a different area of your organization, but what do you need to make your program effective? So there should be somebody who's responsible for the training program. Okay, and that's the person who does the needs assessment. That's the person who determines what classes are going to be taught, how frequently, what methods. They basically create your training design documents, right? And create the whole value statement, return on investment, and discussion to get approval to conduct that course. Okay. And then you have your subject matter experts. These hopefully are they help in your training program development, and they also may be folks who perform and conduct the training. They could be your trainers. Maybe you have somebody from IT who helps you out. There are a lot of different programs. I know we love PowerPoint, but we use Canva, and we use a couple other programs. Like I said, we're getting ready to launch some of our training on a different online platform that we've had to switch all of our material over to. And so some of this stuff can be pretty technical, and there's do's and don'ts to even putting together PowerPoint presentations, or you know, how to most effectively communicate your message. And IT managers can be a really, really valuable resource for that. And then of course we need executive support. Who are we going to sell the idea of doing this training program or having our folks go to a training program to? How do we communicate the value statement? How do we show and measure return on investment? So important. And again, I mentioned this earlier, a piece that I encourage you all to put in your pivot is measurement of the effectiveness of the training that you're going to and the training that's being conducted, and including that Ebbinghouse's learning curve, the 5 follow-up touches, and being able to go out there and measure and see from work being performed if you're seeing changes in behaviors. That's huge, to be able to go back to an executive and say, hey, we just sent these 20 people to competent person class for scaffolds. And before this class, we determined there was a need because we had this trend in all these hazards being observed regarding the subject of scaffolds. And after conducting this class, we did our 5 touches after. It's been 4 months, and we have measured a 50%, I'm making this up, right? A 50% reduction from the trending that we saw and the hazards we saw before to what we see now, right? And we even see proactive changes where our competent persons are planning better. And so just being able to get that executive support so that they say, hey, this is good use of our resources, our very valuable time and our very valuable money, in order to continue supporting this training program, not just because we have to have it by law, but because we see value from it. It's making improvements in our company out in the field, okay? And it's lessening the hazards too, which lessens risk. So I mentioned develop the required training content. I was just going to introduce you to a couple different methods. Again, I could talk about this ADDIE model, you know, all week. But this is one of my favorites, by the way. But this ADDIE method, it's a process. So before you start developing any content or training strategies, you need to analyze the current situation in terms of training, in terms of knowledge gaps, do a needs assessment, right? And really understand what it is, what is the goal of the training itself. This will definitely influence the decisions you make later on in the development of the program's process. And so one of the methods that gets used is called this ADDIE method, and that stands for analysis, design, development, implementation, and evaluation. And really, when we develop a training plan, we're asking and answering the questions, who, what, when, where, why, how. Those aren't new concepts, right? And how can we improve the situation and achieve our business goal through this training? Who should come? What should we be talking to them about? When should they come? How frequently should they come? Where are we going to have the training? Why does this person need this? What's your value statement? And then how are we going to conduct it and measure afterwards, right? Those are some of the basic concepts. So in this ADDIE method, excuse me, that's really the first piece, analyze. That's that who, what, when, where, why, and how. What are your goals? Who's your target audience? And what are your required resources that you need? The next step is design. And this really is with your training plan done, you now move to the design phase. And this is where you take all of the learnings of the previous phase, what you found out in your needs assessment, and you use it to make decisions about what you're going to do. This is your strategy. What are your delivery methods? What's the structure of your course, the duration? How are you going to assess comprehension? And how are you going to gain feedback? So this is where the Bloom's taxonomy comes into play. And this is really a useful tool. You should write that down and look it up, okay? I could talk all day about that too, but I'm just going to introduce it to you. But this is where you decide what are your objectives, what are your delivery methods, and how will you assess learners from low to complex subjects, okay? And so out of this, you should have an overview of the course design, storyboards, any prototypes that you're going to do. From there, you move into the development stage. And this is where you start to create your courses. You're going to be guided by the storyboard or the design document that you created in step 2. And now you're going to start doing things by adding detail and kind of polishing up the course. You might add graphics, you might choose fonts, you might choose other elements that allow you to present the course in a manner that appeals to your audience, okay? A lot of problems that learners encounter are related to how the course was built in this phase, okay? So really important to look at your learning resources, to validate and revise your drafts, have a little pilot test of the class and get feedback and understand, is this hitting the target? Did you accomplish the goals that you intended? Next is the implementation. So after development, you should have your course content, and now we're ready to implement. And this is really where we are making sure everything's been fully tested. Now we're ready to share with the learner. And the decisions that are made in the design phase influence how you're actually going to carry out the course. So in a majority of cases, courses could be uploaded maybe you have a learning management system. Maybe you're just going to find out, how are you going to determine who's enrolled, how much time do they have to take the course, how are they going to pass, fail, how are you going to collect their feedback at the end, which is really important. So where are they going to do the training out? How are you going to engage your participants? And at the end of this phase, you should have your courses live and learners can start to take the complete courses you're actually implementing. And then the last piece, which is really important, is evaluate. And this is where we get feedback from those who attended the course on every aspect of the course. I wish that feedback would stop asking me about the temperature of the room. I should have checked that before we started and be monitoring it. Did we need more snacks? Was the coffee good enough? I want to know about course content. My evaluation form should determine, did I achieve my learning objectives? And what are the key things that somebody learned? And it's nice to have good open-end questions, but we also want to guide some of the questions so we can have specific measurable responses. And in fairness, if you take a class and you fill out the evaluation and you're afraid of offending the instructor or saying anything negative, you're not helping the course. If you give everything back, oh yeah, this was great, but really you're like, I'm never going to go to that again. What a waste of my time, right? So the instructor and the program developer don't know that if you don't give good, honest, fair, and thoughtful feedback, okay? So an evaluation report should be done. We should have actionable changes, and even having people sit in on your course that are other SMEs or other trainers to give you detailed technical feedback is really good as well, okay? So there are different types of summative evaluations and formative evaluations that you can get through this step 5 in the ADDIE model. And that really just has to do with prior to implementation and after implementation, the perceptions, the learning, and the performance of the student, okay? So a little bit about the ADDIE model. There's the ABCD model. These are all good. You just pick whichever one works best for you. I'm not going to spend as much time on this one, but A is the audience. So who's your learning audience? What's your objective? Kind of like your needs assessment, right? What behavior do you want to see exhibited following the training? So what changes are you looking for? What are you specifically targeting? What conditions will the behavior occur under? And to what level or degree will the learner be able to perform these? So I find this one a little bit less in depth. You could have Roger Mager's theory of behavioral objectives. You might use this in establishing your training program, and this is just behavior, condition, and standard. And so the behavior should be specific and observable, kind of like SMART goals, right? Which I'm going to talk about in the next slide. The conditions under which the behavior is to be completed should be stated, and that means what tools or assistance to be provided, and then what's the standard of performance. And so this diagram comes from the ANSI Z490 Occupational Health and Safety Management Standard. One of my favorite standards. If you come to my classes, I talk about it all the time. And this is really an effective and very important tool for establishing training objectives. So is Bloom's taxonomy, by the way. But again, I mentioned that these are SMART: specific, measurable, actionable, realistic, and time-oriented. And so these really should specify what's the need that you're achieving. How are you going to measure whether or not you met the objectives? The objectives really need to be attainable and achievable, right? And realistic and relevant. So I've had people say R is for realistic. I've had people tell me R stands for relevant, but it should achieve a desired result that is achievable. Okay. Time bound, so time oriented. When do you want to see the achieve the set objectives? And if we follow that outline, that's very helpful as well. Talked a little bit about Ebbinghouse's forgetting curve. I actually got this diagram from that Alchemy Systems. They have some great resources and ebooks on learning in there that you can look into. But according to Ebbinghouse's forgetting curve, we forget 90% of what we learn within the first month or even the first week, okay? When we understand how we learn, it's pretty scary. But there is hope, don't give up. We can have reinforcement and refresher tools that act as boosters. That's why it's represented by little rocket ships on here, right? So these booster events help us ensure training retention. And so we want to create short refresher trainings. These could be emails that get sent out. These could be little quizzes. These could be field walks. These could be practical applications, real life case studies, tons of things that can be done to be booster events, okay? And these are scheduled, so these short refresher trainings are delivered during downtime or coordinated with a routinely scheduled meeting that are spread out several weeks after training, okay? And you also want to reinforce learning events. You might want to put out signs or digital messaging strategically throughout your workplace that keep these training concepts top of mind, okay? Leverage these continuous improvement tools for supervisors. You might have, like I said, observation apps. You might have guides to encourage them to go out and find certain hazards related to a subject or focus on certain hazards preventively in a planning session or in their communications. You want to encourage consistent communication. We want to promote positive reinforcement of these learning events. This shouldn't be a punishable negative thing that takes place with these booster events. And we also want to facilitate really digging into applying these thoughts and booster events if we're doing some kind of after event analysis, right? Were the gaps in knowledge related to the subject matter, and did the booster events make a difference or not, okay? So Ebbinghouse's forgetting curve, a huge, huge aspect that most people don't even address in their training programs that can add immediate value. Some other things that are important, I actually love a U-shaped classroom. Every time I can do it, I will. But here's some other options. You know, when you lay out your training facility and your resources, quite often we're just using a conference room, maybe in a job site trailer or an office room that's been available to us, and it's really not the right learning environment, okay? And it does matter, and it does make a difference in terms of the participants' ability to focus and to study and to engage outside of the demands and interruptions of the normal day-to-day workplace, but also in an environment that is comfortable, that allows the student to focus on the subject matter and not all the other environmentally disrupting factors. So we want space to sit comfortably. We want our room set up where people can interact. That's one of the reasons why I love the U shape. Circle's okay too, or hollow square, but you know, depending how many people you have in class, you really need to put some thought process into which methodology that you use. And then we need to make sure that we have equipment for everybody and for all the attendees, and demonstration equipment for the instructor. And then any technical support, resources to support training. Gosh, some of my most panicked moments have been where I've tested my equipment, then I go to start class and it doesn't work again. And oh boy, that's horrible. And so we should make sure that all that stuff has been taken care of, planned for, vetted, and everything's up and working and ready to go. We've thought about the participant and the comfort and the learning environment that we're providing for them. So some participatory methods of instruction, some things you could consider. You know, we have to kind of, like I said, we need to engage the students. So absolutely, I love this first bullet point. We draw on the participants' own knowledge and experience, have them share stories, you know, keep that within the lines, okay? I usually tell people, I don't want to hear about company names or person names. I just want to understand the event, not, you know, we're not going to talk negatively about an organization or an individual. We're just going to share what's the purpose of you sharing this story, what's the learning event behind it, okay? It's also important that everybody participates, and so that should be clearly outlined to the participants that they're participating in these learning events, whether it's hands-on or classroom discussion, is part of the evaluation process as to whether or not they complete the course or not successfully. Okay, just because you show up doesn't mean that, you know, you've completed the course successfully, and that's important, creating that expectation. Now, I know when we do these virtual training meetings, not this is a webinar, but when we do virtual training meetings, we set that out in advance. We have to see you on your camera, you have to be able to speak with us, and that your full participation is required in order to complete the course. And so that means you engage in discussion, you participate in any learning activities we have, you participate in any testing, and any hands-on activities. You're able to bring your equipment to your computer area where you're doing the virtual course and be able to participate that way. So that's important. And then we talked about comfortable learning experience for everybody. Part of that is culture within the classroom. Part of that is classroom environment physically, but that's important. So here's some things that, you know, again, can gain participation. You can have relevant adult icebreakers. You know, you don't want to do things that are childish games. I mean, for me, I'm a professional. I don't pay money or take my time to come to a class to play child's games. I consider that a waste of my time. Some people enjoy those, so know who your audience is, okay? Role playing, again, can be very valuable as long as you keep it very focused and targeted and you know exactly what you're doing and what you're trying to achieve from role playing. Same thing with games. I love small group exercises as long as they're focused and everybody participates. You could have visuals, like find what's wrong on this picture, go find the regulation and tell me as the competent person, what would you do to fix this, okay? Brainstorming, problem solving, case studies, demonstrations and hands-on activities, and then lectures where we'll often give like manufacturer's literature to a certain piece of equipment. We'll have the team go through the information and tell them to brief the class as if we're their crew and you're instructing us how to use this piece of equipment. Okay, so that's a relevant competent person role and a good activity related to that. And then you want to think about what's your method of training. Is it going to be technology based, which is pretty much on demand, or it could be now like this virtual training we're doing a lot of, which I think is great for certain audiences. Is it going to be on the job hands-on training, or is it going to be traditional classroom based or virtual classroom based? Okay, so there are pros and cons to everything, and doing a part of your needs assessment should be determining maybe we do all of these. Maybe we only do one or two, and deciding why for which audience group. Okay. Have a training schedule. So when it comes to production, time's money, right? Time is valuable, minutes count. And so one of the biggest challenges I always hear is that we can't pull people off the job, or we don't have time for this or that. And to me, that's an indicator of that we haven't planned ahead, right? You can not shut a job down and still cycle people through training on an annual or semi-annual or biannual basis, depending what the subject is. You can make sure that some of your training is most effective done in a safety meeting on site. We have one client that we have several shifts at their facility, and day shift always was getting the most training. We said, this is a problem, right? So we pre-recorded and made it available online. Even, I think every generation now knows how to use their phone or go on a computer or can figure it out. That's been one of the biggest myths out there. We had people tell us, nobody knows how to get online to do this training. Are you kidding me? I've had carpenters and laborers and engineers and all levels of the spectrum of employees participating in these webinars and virtual trainings, and it's been great, okay? So, you know, how are we going to get folks into class? You know, what training is needing, what's the length of the training? I was mentioning we did this recorded session, one of our staff did for one of our clients, and we put it online, and we put a quiz with it, and we could track who had attended. And one division attended right away and the other division didn't. So we put up this QR code all throughout the work area. They could come up with their phone, scan the QR code. It would take them straight to the website. They could watch the training and take the test right there, or they could go back later on at home and do it. And so just making it accessible. And then again, measurements of learning. What are we seeing translated from classroom to the field? So this is just an example of one of the training schedules we have. We created a baseline course for our clients, or excuse me, not a course, a baseline matrix, if you will, for our clients, where they could create a training record. You could input the workers by name and position. You could create the same tab for all the different maybe divisions or job sites, or crews, trades. It's really up to you how you break this up. And in this particular example I'm showing you is based on construction. We used OSHA's 2254, which is a document that shows you everywhere in construction in the standard that it says training's required. So you don't have to go find it, waste hours and hours and hours of your own time to come up with this list of training requirements, okay? So then we went through the list and we said, you know, these subjects really are appropriate for monthly training topics, right? Where we're gonna do a half-hour session, or an hour session on a certain subject, or in some companies, they want a whole day session once a month. So really it's specific, but we came through and we listed by subject. We gave a reference to the regulation, and we just kind of listed out a couple key learning points just on the spreadsheet so we knew what went with what. Then farther down the sheet to the right, we have like leadership classes. We have competent person level courses, authorized person level, and even qualified person level. And we basically fill in each, identify which each position, which classes each position needs. If it's a subject that's not blacked out on the spreadsheet, that and it's blank, that means that person needs that subject matter. When we teach it, we put the date in. If it's something that expires, the cell will turn red like 30 to 60 days before that subject matter expires. And I'm able to at a glance, look at my training log. This is very basic, okay? Look at my training log and say, oh, I have 10 people who need fire extinguisher training. Let me make sure I get these 10 people in a class, okay? Or I have 8 people who have never attended competent person scaffold class. And out of these 8 people, they really need this course. So let me go schedule a class and take care of that. So it's a tool, but it's a programmatic tool. It helps you schedule, it helps you look at a glance what you need. And can you imagine having an inspection and being able to pull out something like this that actually visually can represent what's needed and how you are managing your program, okay? So that's important. You have a process. We created some programs for safety training tracks. They're kind of on hold right now as we're going through this COVID, and we're actually putting these online so people can participate at their own pace. But we went through and said, what are some of the classes a supervisor would need? And these are really competent person level courses. What are some of the classes a safety professional would need on how to be a safety professional and manage programs? End user classes, executive classes. A lot of our free courses are taken from bits and pieces of some of these courses that we teach, okay, or topics that are related to that. And then as we get ready to wind down here, let's talk about training program communication tactics. Communication is talking, and it is also listening, right? Or not talking, I guess, putting information out and then receiving information in. And so like anything, if we want involvement and participation, you need to have a communications plan. And so that means having a company-wide training program launch, getting people excited about it, getting people excited about your training program and interested in what they can do to improve themselves personally and professionally and how they can contribute to making the company or the project or the crew better or the best. and really emphasizing those things and making it interesting, you know, so talking about who should attend these trainings, you know, when should you make these announcements? I just had a meeting yesterday on this, and we're going to have another meeting on Friday talking about what are the things we can do to improve our communications on getting people these announcements of the classes and making them interesting announcements and relevant, and is the message we're sending communicating to people well enough of the need and the interest and motivating them to participate. You know, so what should be in the announcement and how should we communicate it? Should this be an email blast? Should this be a phone call? Should this be something that gets posted? Should this be something that gets talked about by their supervisors? Should this be something we mail to people's houses? You get the idea, right? So all different ways. Should we communicate this on social media, right? So lots of different ways to put that out. And I mentioned this, creating new mindsets, really making sure that in our communication strategy, we're focusing on preparing people to learn, preparing people to disprove what they already know, and preparing people for professional development and personal growth, right? New mindsets, we're looking for new results, and we want to be able to measure these results, and people should know that, hey, we're out there measuring, we're going to ask you about what you learned, we're going to come out, and we're going to follow up with you in the field. We're going to have some follow-up activities because of Ebbinghouse's forgetting curve. We do these because we're trying to get better retention. So explain the why behind the what. Adults need to know that. It needs to be logical and it needs to have value for what's in it for them. So if you just go out and you're doing these observations, or you're questioning people after their class, or you're doing these activities after a course, but you're not explaining that you're actually doing that to help people retain better by applying what they learned, it may have the opposite effect of what you're looking for. So really think about your communication strategy. And then, you know, pivot on purpose. Where do you want to be and how do you need to get there? Where are your weak points? Where are your strong points? And, you know, what are some of the tactics that you can employ to get yourself headed back in the right direction? You know, you may have started off with a great training program and it's kind of tailed off. You may not have had a true training program. What are you measuring, and how can you get back on track? Okay, so some of the ways you might do this is through performance reviews. Maybe in your reviews you talk about training that they need to attend, or training that you identify that you want them to attend. How you doing with that? Are employees holding up their end of the bargain? Are you holding up your end of the bargain? Are there gaps in completion and passing rates, and how are you going to address that? Employee satisfaction. What feedback loops are you receiving from your employees? And this is so important, to listen to our workers. Any suggested changes or ideas should be looked at and considered, and give people closure and follow-up. If you looked into one of their recommendations, but you're not going to do it, reach out and let them know that, hey, you looked at this, we're not ready to do this yet, and here's why. Or that you're doing a part of it, or that you're implementing it because of them. People want to know that their feedback is being taken. I recently took a class and I gave some feedback at the end of the course. There was an activity that was kind of not relevant, and it was a little bit frustrating because it was over everybody's head, and the students in the class were getting frustrated, and I thought, nobody's going to write this down, so of course I'm going to write it down. And so I gave some really thoughtful, I thought meaningful feedback, and I didn't hear anything back. I asked about it later. I said, did you folks read my feedback? And they all looked at me funny, and I said, why do you even ask for it if you're not going to do anything with it? You know, that was frustrating. And so don't frustrate people. If you ask for feedback, then there's a purpose for that, and have a process to deal with it, okay? New courses. Are there new rules? Are there new regulations? Are there new positions or policies that require revision to your class or new classes? And is what you're doing still relevant? And have you updated it, or should it be put to pasture? Logistics. Is the current training schedule working with your production schedules? Are there missed sessions and opportunities for folks to catch up if they missed a piece, or could you reschedule it? That could become a nightmare, so be careful with that. But is your onboarding program effective and efficient? And is the training room up to par, right? Is it a place where people want to come to learn and they're comfortable? And then I mentioned this before, very important, Return on investment. Are you meeting your training program SMART goals? How are you measuring it? What are your key performance indicators? How can you show this? How could you take that data to management and be able to support and reinforce your training program? So this is from our website. I love this saying from Harvey Firestone: the growth and development of people is the highest calling of leadership. That's so true. Our growth and our development of how we train folks, of how we teach them how to do business smarter and better, and how to involve them in teams and learning organizations. Huge. It's an honor to be able to teach people something and to have that add value. And it's a big responsibility to make sure that it's accurate and relevant and that it hits the mark. Okay, so I want to encourage you to go back and look at your training programs. If you have one, if you don't have one, to develop one. And I'd like to encourage you to go back and maybe you find yourself with more time than normal, go back and do an evaluation of your program, do a gap analysis. What do you say you will do versus what you've been doing? And do you have goals? Are you meeting the goals? Have you met the goals? And where could you make some improvements, right? I think that's important. All right, I would like to open this up, looking to see if we have any questions. I see Nalani answered a few folks here. And I just want to see if anybody has any questions. Somebody asked, Deborah asked if anybody knows if anybody can translate material for Ilocano. I think there's some of the state organizations that can do translations for free, and some of the tourism authorities. So you might look there, Deborah. Anybody else that'd like to say, what questions do you have for me? I want to encourage you to use the resources that we provided on our website, and encourage you to take a little bit of time before you jump back into work today to complete your safety pivot. So I'll stand by for a couple minutes to see if anybody has any other questions.